Hello, welcome to the video. Goliath was a Philistine giant in the book of Samuel, probably one of the most iconic people in the Bible besides Jesus Christ himself. Goliath was defeated by David, who had to use a sling and stones to defeat him. Goliath is often cited as being one of two numbers. He is either 6 foot 9 inches tall or 9 foot 9 inches tall. While I'm considering talking about the biblical Goliath in the future, given that while it does fall more into the category of religion, it could make for an interesting biology video, today we'll be focusing on a different Goliath. In this video, we'll be looking at possibly the largest Tyrannosaurus specimen ever known, appropriately named Goliath. The four biggest Tyrannosaurus rex specimens known, which I have dubbed the Big Four due to both their sheer size and popularity, are Scotty, Sue, E.D. Cope, and Goliath. One of the things that makes Goliath interesting out of these four specimens is that Goliath was discovered just over a year ago at the time of writing. Sue was discovered in 1990, Scotty in 1991, and E.D. Cope was found in 1999 and excavated in 2000. Goliath, meanwhile, was discovered in September of 2024 by Lauren McLean and Lauren Gertsch in Hardin County, South Dakota. This makes Goliath the most recent addition to the giant Tyrannosaurus collection. Everyone first became aware of Goliath via a post on Instagram from the Mineral and Fossil Marketplace Instagram page, which contains two photos of a giant femur and a table of measurements. The table lists measurements for the femurs of Sue, Stan, Scotty, E.D. Cope, and average Tyrannosaurus according to them, and Goliath. The measurements listed for Goliath's femur are 137.1 centimeters long and 64.77 centimeters in circumference. The next largest is E.D. Cope's femur, who is listed at 127 centimeters long and 63.3 centimeters in circumference. Both specimens are a massive jump in size compared to the next largest listed, Scotty, who is placed at 133.3 centimeters long and 59 centimeters in circumference. Goliath would later go on to get more widespread attention thanks to the YouTube channel The Vividen, Paleontology Evolved, who has done numerous videos on theropod dinosaur size. Via the Vividen, you can find a calculator that estimates the size of animals based on the measurements of their femurs. It also does quadrupeds, which requires both the femur and humerus. The calculator features 4 different formulas as seen on screen, but the only 2 relevant are the ones listed as My Method by the creator, Dino W, and the 2014 formula. Dino W's formula uses both the femur length and circumference, while the 2014 formula uses only the circumference. This calculator will be listed below if you want to use it yourself. When you plug the measurements from the table into the calculator, Goliath is between 11.47 and 11.67 metric tons. For comparison, E.D. Cope is 10.4 to 10.8, and Scotty is 8.87 to 9.54 metric tons. Vividen in his first video on Goliath placed him at a range of 11.47 to 12.53, and Cope at 10.6 to 11.7 metric tons. However, he does stress that Cope is better in terms of completeness than Goliath, and to take a grain of salt with Goliath's numbers. Suspending the skepticism briefly, Goliath gets even scarier when you investigate it further. Reason being is because, as shown in a photo comparing the femur to a human outline, there is portions of it missing. You see, the usual place other specimens are measured from is from the greater trochanter to the lateral condyle, which is the outside of the femur. Instead, because the trochanter was damaged in transport according to the Vividen, it was measured from the femoral head to medial condyle, which gives a slightly larger length. It's worth knowing that some of the lengths in the table posted on Instagram are using the former measurement, skewing it slightly in favour of Goliath. Measuring from the femoral head to medial condyle gives slightly larger results for Sue and Scotty, however there is still some missing material of the portions Goliath was measured from. This means that when complete, Goliath probably did have a longer femur regardless of where you measured from. Due to the missing portions of the femur, Dr. Brian Curtis of Fossil Crates believe that there could have been an extra 2 to 4 centimeters of length on the femur because of this. This takes us from 137.1 to 139.1 to 141.1. As a result, this bumps Goliath up to 11.83 to just under 12 metric tons. Although given this is a speculative higher end, it's probably better to not use this. The Vividen in a later video on all known megatheropods later stated that scaling from Sue and Scotty, Goliath could have potentially had a mass between 12.34 and 12.96 metric tons. He states after listing those, however, pardon my French, but these sizes are getting pretty darn ridiculous. Some, like Edge, given the different points of measuring, have claimed that Goliath might only be a tiny bit bigger than Sue, because when Sue is measured from the femoral head to medial condyle, the measurements are a lot closer. As a counter-argument, femur circumference is a more reliable indicator of size than femur length. Alongside that, perhaps Goliath is an older Tyrannosaurus with better genetics than Sue for size. According to the 2025 book King Tyrant by Mark Whidden, pages 77 to 75, researchers have identified throughout T-Rex research history what were dubbed robust and gracile morphs of Tyrannosaurus. These were used at one point by Peter Larson in 2008 to propose a species he didn't scientifically name, but informally nicknamed Tyrannosaurus X, which was published in 2008's Tyrannosaurus Rex, the Tyrant King. Some have also proposed that these two different forms are in fact a case of sexual dimorphism, which is a topic for a future video. However, as pointed out by Whitten, several studies don't show any neat cluster of robust and gracile morphs, and when compared with modern animals, T-Rex specimens don't differ as much as we think. It just appears so because we have more T-Rex specimens than any other large theropod dinosaur. Whitten does note that, in his eyes at least, the simplest explanation is that these are growth stages of Tyrannosaurus, and I do agree that's probably the right answer. From there, what could be the case is that Goliath's femur might have just stopped growing in length, but kept growing in width as Goliath's frame became more robust. This would explain the insignificant difference in femur length between Goliath and Sue, and the statistically significant difference in femur circumference. With that in mind, perhaps I should educate myself more on Tyrannosaurus growth patterns before speculating further. I guess you guys now know what a future video might be on. On top of that, assuming Sue and Goliath's femurs are the same length, just for the sake of the argument, at say 138 centimeters, but still have different circumference, we do still get different numbers. Plugging the numbers into DinoW's formula using femur length and circumference, we get 9.54 metric tons for Sue and 11.75 for Goliath. Assuming Goliath's weight does correspond to femur size, like a lot of paleontologists think it does with dinosaurs in general, then Goliath is still bigger than Sue. Of course, Goliath could still just have had enormously thick thighs relative to its body, but unless we unearth more material of Goliath, it's basically up in the air in how you want to interpret it. Do you prefer giant sauropod slaying Tyrannosaurus or thick thighs save lives Tyrannosaurus? One of the main problems I can see people having with Goliath is that, well, it is known from only a single femur. However, the femur is a bone that would be taking most of the strain in a bipedal animal, so it is better than, say, a fragmentary jaw to estimate the size of Goliath. A more important point would be that Scotty, Sue, and E.D. Cope all have measurements that were published in scientific articles, which makes them more credible than an Instagram post. Some people early on doubted how big E.D. Cope was, but his measurements are in scientific literature and are compared in a table with several other specimens. This makes Cope better verified as a large Tyrannosaurus specimen than Goliath. As seen with the Mike Israetel controversy on the bodybuilding side of YouTube, academia can't always be trusted, but I doubt anyone is forging numbers for the femur of E.D. Cope, given the paper they were published in was Gregory Paul's 2022 Free Tyrannosaurus Species paper, where Cope wasn't the main subject. Another thing worth noting is that I think some people probably just have a hard time believing Tyrannosaurus might have been nearly 12 metric tons in weight. I guess to a certain extent this brings up something about the Biblical Goliath mentioned earlier, that being he's said to be between 6'9" and 9'9" in height. Assuming the Biblical Goliath was nearly 10 feet tall, or about 3 meters, that'd make him significantly bigger than any other documented human over 8 feet tall, so big that it honestly becomes hard to believe, hence why a lot of people believe he was only 6'9". As pointed out by Edge in his video on Goliath, the specimen is also in a private collection, that being the Black Hills Institute of Geological Research. Even though Dr. Brian Curtis of Fossil Crates has seen the specimen and measured it himself, I think a lot of us would prefer if a proper, rigorous description could be published and the specimen was made publicly available to researchers. In terms of what Goliath means for Tyrannosaurus itself, a 2024 study estimated that the largest Tyrannosaurus would have been more than 70% larger than Scotty, or about 15 versus 8.87 metric tons. Goliath at the higher end in this video of nearly 12 metric tons is already 80% of the way to being that size. Perhaps large specimens of Tyrannosaurus like Goliath weren't as uncommon as some might think, given it's also been estimated that roughly 2.5 billion individuals existed throughout the species' evolutionary history. Perhaps the higher end of Tyrannosaurus size is even bigger than this 2024 study believed it was, Or perhaps individuals close to that size were more common than we think. But even then, that's all speculation and doesn't really tie in much with Goliath, apart from Goliath being very big. Besides that, honestly, not much can be said for Goliath. It's literally just a big femur and that's about it. No associated arms, ribs, vertebrae, nothing but a chunky femur as far as I'm aware. So it's not like other specimens that have stuff like pathologies or markings that give better insight into the life of Tyrannosaurus. It's just a femur. In conclusion, Goliath, while not overly special, does show that Tyrannosaurus might have attained some large sizes at times. However, given Goliath is only known from a femur and the measurements aren't exactly very concrete and haven't been published in anything that could be considered authoritative, not a lot can be said for Goliath besides big femur. Anyway, that's all for today. Hopefully you will like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you next time I upload. Goliath was a Philistine giant in the Book of Samuel, probably one of the most... You've gotta be kidding me! As soon as I start recording, dogs start barking in the background. Incredible! Another thing worth noting is that I forgot to put my phone on mute.